I'm going to do a little presentation now before we go into breakout groups. And so I just wanted to share this a little bit, called the Power Cube. So this comes actually out from something from the University of Sussex, the Department of Development Studies a few years ago. And it is a bit old, but I think it's got some really interesting ideas in it. So it's a sort of three-dimensional framework for analyzing the levels, the spaces, and forms of power and their sort of interrelationship. So I was just going to go through the introduction to that, and I will make sure I share later on all of the sort of detail or where you can find out more if it's interesting. So the levels dimensions of the power cube refers to the differing layers of decision making and authority held on a vertical scale. So that could include local, national, and global. So local power, in many contexts of national decision making, I think I'll read it because it's easier than trying to paraphrase it. Subnational decision making arenas are critical points of leverage for holding and challenging power over planning, allocating, and monitoring budgets and holding local institutions to account. And obviously, that's the sort of level that most PB happens at. But of course, then we've got national power. So despite the growing importance of supranational bodies of international or regional governance, many argue that the national government is still the critical entry point for change. But what we have increasingly seen, and we see it through things like COP and many of those other global initiatives, that globalization and new forms of global governance have created a wide array of formal and informal state and non-state spaces for participation and influence at levels beyond the nation state. And a particular one that people may have heard of is the Global Assembly for climate change. So that's an initiative of trying to bring together the voices of people across the globe and then influence people. And they're playing quite a prominent role in COP30 that's happening in Berlin in Brazil at the moment. They also talk about in the Power Cube about spaces. So the spaces dimension refers to the political and the potential arenas for participation and action, including what we call closed, invited, and claimed spaces. So the closed power spaces are spaces that involve issues like trade, macroeconomic and finance policy, military policy, etc., which have a great deal of impact on people's lives, but are generally considered off limits for public participation. And then we've got invited power. So that's sort of the area we're in. New opportunities for involvement and consultation, usually through invitation from various authorities, be they government, supranational agencies, or non-governmental occupations. So that's about inviting people into a space to share power. And then there's claimed power. So those are the organic spaces that emerge out of sets of common concerns or identifications and may come into being as a result of mobilization around identity or issue-based concerns, or may consist of spaces where like-minded people join together in common pursuits. And I suppose that made me think of Barry's case of claiming power, of people just by meeting together actually claiming power over their own lives and finding their voice and agency. But I actually think this is quite a really interesting one, which is the forms dimension, which refers to the way in which power manifests itself, including its visible, hidden, and invisible forms. So visible power are contests over interests which are visible in the public spaces or informal decision-making bodies. So that's political bodies campaigning. We've heard from Sophia talking about what's been happening in Islington, or Deb talking about the change in the culture in Cornwall. So local government bodies, local assemblies like our house, or consultative forums. So they're visible spaces where power can be exercised. But then there's hidden spaces, which are used by vested interests to maintain their power and privilege by creating barriers to people participating, by excluding key issues from the public arena, or by controlling politics backstage. And I think there's been, again, referring to COP30, it's going on at the moment, a lot of concerns that COP30 has been basically taken over by hidden power actors, lobbyists, people who are making backroom deals, influencing what is going on. And then there's invisible power, and that's the ways in which awareness of one's rights and interests are hidden through the adoption of dominating ideologies, of values, or forms of behavior by relatively powerless groups themselves. So that's in a sense about how we have become embodied with other people's ideas of what our power should be. So that's all I wanted to introduce. I just thought it was an interesting framework. We are dealing with power because power is money. Frame that as a conversation. And the first question I'd like you to discuss is why does understanding power matter? And then how do we take down the barriers around power?